Well, this was probably the first mediocre weekend of the entire racing season. But why did it have to be when IndyCar started up? Well, we're going to get into all that, so let's get started. This is Final Analysis. What's happening, ladies and germs? This is the PackerMan, and welcome to this week's edition of Final Analysis. I was really looking forward to this race weekend due to the fact that IndyCar was starting up this week at St. Petersburg, but there was something that happened in the middle of it that kind of ruined the race, and of course the rest of the race was kind of stupid. Well, not stupid, it kind of And then the Cup race was overall, it had a good finish, technically. Overall, it's kind of boring as hell, except for the restarts. But we're going to be getting into all of that, so let's start with the Xfinity Series. All you really need to know about the Xfinity Series race is that Kyle Busch won it. I mean, after Christopher Bell and Justin Allgaier were taken out, getting caught up in the mess of an engine failure, it was all Kyle Busch at that point because his two toughest competitors were taken out and he basically had no competition for the rest of the race. Kyle Busch seriously needs to get the fuck out of the Xfinity Series. It has gotten so old at this point that some people are just so sick and tired of it, and he snags yet another victory, once again to stroke his own ego. If Kyle Busch wasn't in that race, that would have been Ryan Truex's first career win. Do some of you not see the problem with that, with Kyle Busch running in this series? Because honestly, if you don't see the problem, you're as blind as a bat, as far as I'm concerned. So, f*** the Xfinity Series race. Let's go ahead and get into the IndyCar Series review. The first race of the season, the Firestone Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. The first half of it was pretty good. Will Power started from the pole, which is his 55th career pole, and his 8th at St. Petersburg, but he's only won there twice. They also had something happen at the beginning of that race that had never happened before. Everybody started on the softer tires, the red sidewall tires, which was highly unusual. It had never happened before, ever since they went to the dual compound. So that was interesting. One of the new kids on the block, Marcus Ericsson, was the first to pit for the primary tires on lap 7. But a guy that we need to watch out for this year, I think, is Felix Rosenqvist. I mean, this guy, I think, has the talent necessary to put that 10 car back up near the front of the field, whereas it seems like ever since Dario Franchitti retired due to that injury at Houston, that 10 car just hasn't been really the same. And that 10 car has seen a lot of, it's been a revolving door in that 10 seat. But I'm telling you, Felix Rosenqvist I think he's the real deal. And he showed it early on when he was challenging Will Power for the lead. And we will get to a certain restart here in a minute that really showcased that this guy might be the real deal. Sebastian Bourdais, who was going for the three-peat, blows a motor on lap 14, which that kind of sucks for him, because he was going for the three-peat. Managed to pull it off the track, though. Will Power got word in his ear that there might have been a caution that come out because of it, although it didn't. It was just a local yellow, and he darted onto pit road and nearly missed the pit lane, but managed to get there. But the first caution does come out on lap 20 when Ryan Hunter-Reay blows a motor down the front stretch, and he can't get off the racetrack, and that draws the caution. And then on the restart, Rosenqvist, that was a brilliant move on the inside of Will Power for the lead. Locked the right front up a little bit, but kept it rolling, and made a great pass for the lead. That was brilliant. Honestly, that was really the only quality pass for the lead, as it turns out. All the other passes for the lead were in the pits, which, I mean, St. Petersburg, I think, is a serviceable season opener. I mean, there are a lot of times that it's not great. It's not terrible, not great. I think last year was definitely a huge exception. Last year was kick-ass, but this year kind of settled back down to right around middling portion. But I mean, the first half of this race was still pretty decent. Then we had our second and final caution on lap 27. Ed Jones clips the inside wall in turn 9, and that causes him to go right into the outside wall. And Matthias Laced clips the right rear tire with his left rear and destroys his car as well. So that's 2 more cars out of the race. Then we get back to green flag racing with Rosenqvist leading a lot of laps. And then Will Power manages to get out ahead of Rosenqvist on the pit cycle. And the two nearly made contact when Rosenqvist was coming out of the pit lane. That was quite close. So Power leads for the next little bit. And then on the next pit cycle, Newgarden stayed out the longest and was using a lot of push to pass, while a lot of his rivals who had already pitted was stuck basically in traffic, and that ended up being the race-winning move for Newgarden, who finally came in and actually managed to get out ahead of everybody else, and basically built up a lead of about 8 to 10 seconds, and that's basically where it stayed for the remainder of the race, at least until the end, which we'll get to here in a minute. Dixon and Power nearly make contact in turn 1 as they battled for third, but Dixon managed to get to the inside and made the pass clean. Well, not exactly clean. They did rub a little bit, but it wasn't like hard rubbing. It was just a little bumpy into turn 1 and 2. But Dixon managed to get by and took over the third position. And this is when the race went to shit. And this is not exactly something that you want if you're NBC. Apparently, NBC SN lost the live feed for a while. They went to commercial and they were in side by side, and then all of a sudden the live feed went dead. So for about the next 10 or 15 minutes, they didn't have any live feed for the race. And then they came back on at one point and they said they were experiencing technical difficulties, and you can actually hear it. They had like a still shot up on the screen, and the sound coming out was not that good. I mean, it was pretty shit quality, if I may say so myself. But they were basically turned it into radio basically for a bit. That's not exactly something that you want to have happen for your first race under this new deal with NBC. I mean, wow. I guarantee you that lost them a lot of viewers. Honestly, the race just went downhill from there. I mean, the race went green the rest of the way after that second caution, but the racing from that point forward was virtually non-existent. So that kind of sucks. I mean, Newgarden built up an 8-second lead. Then we had one of the banners that they usually hang on the wall that have like Chevrolet or something like that on it. Got knocked off and was sitting in the track in the middle of turns 2 and 3. But it was kind of off the racing line, so they decided, we're not going to worry about it, which was fine, because it kept the race green. In the closing laps of the race, Dixon started cutting into Newgarden's lead, thanks to some lap cars, and I basically tweeted out that, Marco Andretti in particular needed to get the fuck out of the way. I tell you, that's one of those things that really brings my piss to a boil when it comes to racing, is lap cars getting in the way of the leaders when they're racing for the win. I hate that so much. I mean, when it gets down to the final 10 laps of a race and you're a lap down or close to being a lap down and the leaders are coming on you, get the fuck out of the way. I mean, if there's one thing that I would not want to do as a driver, it's interfere with the battle for the win. Because reputation-wise, that would be a huge hit for you. Reputation-wise, it would go down the drain. But Dixon started closing down the gap. It was 8 seconds, and he managed to get down to about 2 seconds. Newgarden managed to get around Andretti finally, and he opened the gap back up and basically held Scott Dixon at bay, and Justin Newgarden wins the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. Not exactly the best of starts for IndyCar, and I said last week that IndyCar had its work cut out for him with NASCAR, the Cup Series in particular, getting off to a pretty good start. Of course, Cup wasn't that much better today either, so we're going to be getting to that in a minute. But yeah, I mean, it was about what you would expect for a typical St. Petersburg race. But I tell you what, man, that network outage, or that feed outage in the middle of the race, that definitely knocks a point off right there. It's like, wow. I mean, how can you drop the ball like that? It's insane. So my final rating for The 2019 Firestone Grand Prix of St. Petersburg, I gotta give it a 4 out of 10. I mean, it was a below average race, which, you know, is typical for St. Petersburg. I mean, it's a serviceable season opener, but I tell you what, that power outage, that really sucked some of the life out of this race, I think. And the second half of the race was just, it cooled off big time, and it got to the point where it was basically ice cold, the second half of that race. I mean, up until the chase with Dixon, but even then he couldn't, I mean, he got down, but I mean, once Newgarden got clear of the lap traffic, it was basically curtains. Not exactly the best of starts for IndyCar this year. So, 2 weeks, we'll be going to Circuit of the Americas for the first time. So, a lot of expectations for that race. And hopefully it'll be a much better race than we saw today at St. Petersburg. And now we're going to get into the Cup race, the TicketGuardian 500 at Phoenix. Where do we even begin with this race? I mean, this race was such a mixed bag. I mean, we only had 4 pure lead changes in this race, as opposed to the previous couple races. So, just to review, here are the number of pure lead changes that we've had in 2019 in the Cup Series. At Daytona, we had 4 pure lead changes. Atlanta, we had 9, which is the season high so far. And Las Vegas, we've had 8 pure lead changes. Today, we only had 4. And we had large pockets of this race where it was basically just Kyle Busch, Kyle Busch, Kyle Busch. At least the announcers made it a point to basically say that, yeah, while Kyle Busch is closing in on 200 wins, you can't really compare his 200 wins to Richard Petty's 200 wins. And there were quite a few on the broadcast that were saying as much. So, thank you for saying that, because, you know, I know David Land on Twitter is basically, you know, he's trying to troll people saying, yeah, we're going to crown a new king. David, seriously, enough with that shit. As I'm getting buzzed by my phone here. Damn it. Give me 1 second. Of course, I'm probably going to get a response here in a second.
Flex tape is just ordinary tape. It's triple thick adhesive, virtually taped itself to the tape. Instantly taped the tape.
Anyway, getting back to what I was saying. David, seriously, enough with the trolling already. Alright? Seriously. I mean, I know you're trying to get a rise out of people by saying, oh, Kyle Busch is going to be the new king. You've been doing that for about a month now. Enough already. Okay? There comes a point in time when you gotta realize when a joke has worn out its welcome. Okay? Enough with that shit already. It's gotten to the point where it's starting to become as putridly old as dog shit. Okay, I know you like to be a troll on Twitter sometimes, but you gotta learn when enough is enough. Period. Let's go ahead and get into the meat of the review. Stages 1 and 2 were 75 laps, with stage 3 being 162 laps. So Ryan Blaney started from the pole. Chase Elliott was on his outside, but got a penalty for jumping the start when he beat Ryan Blaney to the line. And that's going to be my first nitpick of this race. A lot of the rules in NASCAR fucking suck. I'm just going to go ahead and say that right. I realize that him jumping the start is not allowed in the rule book, you know, because there were people like, you know, once again, Eric Estep and Joseph Lombard. They were basically like, yeah, it's in the rule book, you know, so, you know, some of you on Twitter need to stop complaining. So, in other words, we can't agree with what the rule says. There's my response right there. Okay? We understand that the goddamn rule exists, okay? Doesn't mean we have to agree with it, okay? So for those of you that are saying that, there's my response right there. If I don't agree with something, I don't fucking agree with it. I swear to God, I get so sick and tired of that shit. I didn't realize that not agreeing with certain things was considered whining in today's world. I mean, what kind of shit logic is that? Ridiculous. Anyway, we have our first pure lead change on lap 37 when Kyle Busch takes the lead. And then right afterwards, we get our first caution on lap 39. A lot of cautions in this race. Eric Jones loses the right rear tire and spins in turns 1 and 2. And his day basically went south. So everyone came in for service. Several drivers took just 2 tires. And Kyle Busch was the first off with 4 tires. I don't think he even did 4 tires at all this race because there was really no point for him to do it because he had the best car. Hamlin leads on the restart. Before that, Newman and Truex were penalized for speeding, although Truex's performance late in this race is something to be admired, and we'll get to that in a minute. We had our second pure lead change on lap 47 with Kyle Busch. And then caution number 2 on lap 63, when Keselowski lost the tire as well. I think it was the right front this time, and it rubbed up against the, it was starting to deflate and then started rubbing up against the track bar. His day went south from there. So everybody comes in for service once again. Kyle Busch wins the race off pit road. And we had about 10 cars who stayed out. And this was like right at the end of the stage too. So it was obvious that people were going for stage points and stuff like that. So Ryan Blaney leads on the restart, is able to hold everybody at bay and wins stage number 1. It was a meh stage. One thing I will point out, that as mediocre as this race was overall, the restarts were pretty damn amazing. I mean, when you have guys going 5 wide into turns 1 and 2, like, holy crap, dude. I mean, these guys were going balls to the wall on these restarts. So that's one thing I will give this race credit for. The restarts were insane. You know, especially with, you know, how the start-finish line is right there, right before the dog leg, and of course, everybody's going to go diving to the inside in that dog leg to try to get position, and then everybody's just going 2 lanes, you know, below the yellow line, you know, in turns 1 and 2, and it's just like, geez Louise, man, these guys have, you know, so much room to race, and we get all this, you know, 3 and 4 wide restart stuff. But once it starts stretching out, there wasn't much in the way of racing overall. You know, it was a meh first stage, but, you know, we actually, that's kind of a trend this year, was the first stage, you know, was slow. I mean, the races kind of got off to a slow start, but would eventually start tracking upward. You know, the first 3 races did that. That was not the case in this race, though, because stage 2, wow, probably the worst stage of the year so far. Stage 2 was 75 laps. Kyle Busch leads the start of stage 2. They went 5 wide in turns 1 and 2. So that was pretty crazy. But after all that settled out, the rest of this stage was boring as hell. I mean, I was literally falling asleep in my chair. It was that bad. Yeah, I needed some coffee after that one. But the third caution came out on lap 148 when Alex Bowman lost the right front tire, which would not be the last time he did so. And the stage would end under caution with Kyle Busch winning it. So I believe that's his second stage win of the year. But either way, at this point, I was saying to myself, this race sucks ass.
It sucked ass!
Stage 3, 162 laps. It would start getting a little bit better, I guess. At least, but not at the beginning, though. I mean, this is when the race started getting crash happy. Kyle Busch led the start of stage 3, but then we had our fourth caution on lap 160 when Michael McDowell suddenly slowed down the backstretch. And his teammate David Reagan actually got into him. But initially we thought it might have been a tire or something, but as it turns out, as he said in the interview, it was a hung throttle. And he tried to slam the brakes to get the engine to cut out, and he ended up slamming the wall, and that would be the end of his day. Of course, the weekend for McDowell has not been, wasn't too kind to him, because him and Daniel Suarez got into a scrum during qualifying because they were getting into each other's way and they had a little bit of a fist fight on pit road. Also, I saw, afterwards what Drew Blickensderfer did when he tried to push Suarez away against the car. Fuck you, Blickensderfer. You were just as much of a punk as McDowell was. Because, it looked like he had a hand on Suarez's throat. And also shoving him onto the race car. Are you fucking stupid? You do realize that you don't own that car, right? So you're going to pay for the damages that could have potentially been done to that car? Moron. Anyway, Kyle Busch leads on the restart. Then we had our 5th caution on lap 194 and Bowman loses the right front tire again. So at this point, everyone comes in for service. Jimmy Johnson and Austin Dillon take just 2 tires. And Busch is off with first off with 4 tires, of course. So Johnson leads on the restart. But didn't take long for Kyle Busch to get the lead back. Got it back in turn 2. But Johnson actually held his own for a while. There was a little bit of 3 wide action between Harvick, Truex, and Logano for 4th. So that was pretty cool. This is when the cautions really started flying. And it's like, oh, God. This is when the race started to take another dip in quality. When we started having all these freaking caution flags. So we had 6 caution on lap 219. Chase Elliott spins in turns 3 and 4. But was able to get it back going. Everyone comes in for service. We had a lot of cars taking just 2 tires. So Kyle was the first off with 4 tires. This would actually be the last pit stop for some people because they would try to go the rest of the way on fuel. So that would come into the equation. So Daniel Hemrick, who stayed out, leads on the restart. But then we get the 7th caution on lap 227 immediately afterwards when Ryan Preece comes down on Daniel Suarez and he gets spun into the inside wall. And Kez scrapes the inside wall trying to avoid him. So Almirola, who was also on the front row, managed to get ahead of Hemrick, and he's going to lead on this restart. But then we get yet another caution right afterwards when Ryan Preece wrecked once again. They didn't really show why he wrecked, which was kind of dumb. So Almirola led on the restart. Eventually, Ryan Blaney's car would come to life here in the last part of the race and get the 3rd pure lead change on lap 252. And it was at this point that Kyle Busch started going into chase mode. And this is when the race got a little interesting because, Ryan Blaney was told that he might have been 2 laps short on fuel. And there was a bit of a question mark as to whether or not Kyle Busch was going to make it all the way on fuel. So you had a bit of a cat and mouse game going on between Blaney and Kyle. And at the same time, Truex was bull rushing through the field like a rocket. It basically got to the point where he was only a second behind at the end of the race. We get our 4th and final pure lead change on lap 293 when Kyle Busch gets around Ryan Blaney. At that point, Blaney started going into fuel save mode. Truex manages to get around him for 2nd, and he got to within 1 second of Kyle Busch at the end of this race. I think if he would have had 1 or 2 more laps, I think Truex would have won this race. And a lot of people were doubting whether or not, he would continue having, this great run late in his career, by moving to that 19 car. I think the only bad race he's had so far is Daytona. Yeah, Kyle Busch wins the TicketGuardian 500 for his 52nd career Cup win, his 199th overall in NASCAR's top 3 series. But, it was pretty obvious that nobody was going to beat Kyle Busch on this day. Everybody was trying to take 2 tires to try to get out ahead of him, but nobody was beating Kyle Busch in this race. One of the shocking things was that Kevin Harvick was never a factor in this race. When we go to ISM Raceway, as it's called now, Kevin Harvick is usually one of the favorites to win, yet he was never a factor in this race. And it's just like, wow. It just seems like SHR is a little bit off to start 2019. I don't know if it's because, they're trying to get adjusted to the new Mustangs or what the deal is, but, it doesn't necessarily mean that Harvick has not been good, because he had back-to-back top 5s coming into this race. It's just that compared to last year, they seem to be a little bit off. But one guy who doesn't seem to be off at all is Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. Those two have been doing pretty good this year. Like I said, Truex's only bad race was Daytona, but Kyle Busch, with his 52nd career Cup Series victory, honestly, that chase by Kyle Busch to run down Ryan Blaney, you know, and the fuel mileage stuff that was going on. I mean, that made the race definitely a little bit more interesting near the end. And Truex's charge was just out of this world. Like, holy crap. I mean, at one point in the run, he was 9 seconds behind the leader, and he managed to cut it down to a second at the checkered. That's pretty damn impressive. But, I mean, this race overall, it was definitely a meh race. I mean, stage 2 was god-awful. That was a craptastic stage. Picked up a little bit at the end, like I said, with the chase with Kyle Busch chasing down Ryan Blaney and the fuel mileage and Truex's run. But other than that, in my opinion, this was a below average race. So my final rating for the 2019 TicketGuardian 500, it's going to be a 4.5 out of 10. So overall, it was a mediocre weekend of racing this week, which kind of sucks because I've been looking forward to IndyCar coming back this week and going to Phoenix, which typically does give us some pretty good racing. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't mind-numbingly good. I mean, the restarts were fantastic. It's just that everything else was just kind of and that second stage was garbage. Oh my god. That may have been the worst stage of the year so far. That's going to do it for this week here on Final Analysis. Well, had to take a dip at some point, unfortunately. But, you know, that's just the way it goes sometimes. But I want to thank you very much for watching. And until next time, this is the PackerMan signing out.